Edmund Blackadder, the fictitious comedy character played by Rowan Atkinson, appears at various moments in British history. The Wars of the Roses, the court of Queen Elizabeth I, Regency London, and the trenches of the First World War. There have even been some one-offs where he meets Queen Victoria and ends up at the Battle of Waterloo. And whilst he never meets the Duke of Marlborough or fights at the Battle of Blenheim, what if I told you that a real-life Blackadder actually did? Lieutenant Colonel John Blackadder was a Scottish soldier who served in the British Army at the end of the 17th and beginning of the 18th centuries. And unlike Rowan Atkinson's character, this Blackadder fought in at least 8 battles and sieges. He was wounded 3 times, and he commanded his regiment, the Cameronians. A God-fearing Presbyterian, he nevertheless fought a fellow officer in a duel and killed him. So sit back as I introduce you to the Blackadder who fought at the Battle of Blenheim. John Blackadder was born in Dumfriesshire, southwest Scotland, in 1664. He was one of 7 children of the prominent Calvinist preacher, also called John Blackadder. Blackadder Sr. held such strong Protestant views that he was ejected from his parish upon the restoration of King Charles II. Undaunted, he became a travelling field preacher, conducting illegal open-air sermons across southern Scotland, preaching his fire and brimstone version of Christianity, whilst also denouncing, as he saw it, the popery of the king down in London. Not best pleased with his messages, the government imprisoned him on the Bass Rock, a fortress island in the Firth of Forth, used to hold Covenanter prisoners, where he died in 1685. Maybe unsurprisingly, his strict nonconformist beliefs rubbed off on his children. His eldest son, William, a doctor, joined the Earl of Argyll in his disastrous attempts to organise a rebellion against Charles's successor, the Catholic James II. The revolt, which was timed to coincide with the rising by the Duke of Monmouth in England, was, like its English counterpart, swiftly put down. The Earl was executed and William Blackadder imprisoned. When in 1688 James II was overthrown by his Protestant daughter, Mary, and her Protestant Dutch husband, William of Orange, in what was called the Glorious Revolution, William Blackadder became a royal surgeon. Whilst William and Mary's takeover was welcomed by the majority Protestant population, it wasn't welcomed by everyone. Pro-Catholic and pro-James supporters, Jacobites, under James Graham, Viscount Dundee, rose in rebellion in Scotland. Supporters of William and Mary rapidly began to raise regiments to protect the new regime. And one such regiment was raised in May 1689 by James Douglas, Earl of Angus. It drew its recruits from the Scottish Presbyterian Cameronian sect, named after another Covenanter preacher, Richard Cameron, who'd been killed by government forces in 1680. The Cameronians were distinctively religious, even by the standards of the day. Each company had an elder as well as a captain, and the regiment had its own Cameronian chaplains. They were nicknamed the Psalm-Singing Regiment for their devotional practices in camp and on campaign. Based upon the family history, both the cause and the regimental ethos appealed to the Blackadder family. And this is where young John Blackadder rejoins our story. He signed up as an ensign, the most junior officer rank, and fought with the regiment at the Battle of Dunkeld. There, approximately 800 men from the new regiment held the town of Dunkeld against over 3,000 Jacobite Highlanders. The battle, which lasted all day with fierce house-to-house fighting, resulted in a government victory, which effectively ended the 1689 Jacobite Rising in Scotland. Blackadder survived uninjured, after writing that several were falling on my right and left hand. He was swiftly promoted to lieutenant, serving in both the 13th and 14th companies of the regiment. His next battlefield experience would be in continental Europe during the 9 Years' War. Also known as the War of the Grand Alliance, or King William's War in North America, this conflict pitted the British, along with the Dutch, the Holy Roman Empire, Spain, Savoy, and various German states, against Louis XIV of France, who had been trying to expand his territories. It was the first time that large-scale English armies had been deployed to the continent in a sustained campaign since the 100 Years' War, 2.5 centuries before. By 1697, over 56,000 British troops were stationed in the Netherlands, including the Cameronians. However, before he ever fought the enemy, John Blackadder had to survive another fight. In December 1691, while stationed at Maastricht, Blackadder was challenged to a duel by Lieutenant Robert Murray of the Royal Scots. The ensuing fight resulted in Murray's death. Blackadder was court-martialled, but pardoned by King William III in May 1692 and restored to his position. The affair did not seem to affect his standing in the regiment, as he was promoted to captain in January 1693, just a few months later. However, the psychological impact of killing Robert Murray was to leave a lasting impact on him. 12 years later, in April 1703, when the regiment returned to Maastricht during the War of the Spanish Succession, Blackadder wrote in his diary, "We came to Maastricht in the evening. At night I went alone to visit that spot of ground as near as I could find it, where 12 years ago I committed that unhappy action. And there I fell down on my knees and prayed, as I had done several times throughout the day, that God would deliver me from blood guiltiness." You can't imagine Rowan Atkinson's character having such religious remorse, can you? During the 9 Years' War, John Blackadder fought at the battles of Steenkirk, Landen and the Siege of Namur in 1695. The war ended in an uneasy peace, but the underlying tensions remained unresolved, and within 4 years they exploded again in the War of the Spanish Succession. The war started in 1702 and saw some of the most famous British military victories in history under the command of John Churchill, Duke of Marlborough, including the Battle of Blenheim. It would also see John Blackadder wounded 3 times and rise to command his regiment. His and the Cameronians' first action was at the Battle of Schellenberg on the 2nd of July 1704. Captain Blackadder and the Cameronians formed part of the British attack, which successfully captured the fortified position. However, Blackadder's men paid a heavy price for this victory. Of the 130 Cameronians who participated, 19 were killed and 62 wounded. Blackadder himself walked away unscathed. He wouldn't be so lucky next time. Just over a month later, he found himself fighting in Marlborough's most famous victory, the Battle of Blenheim. Once more, the Cameronians were in the thick of the fighting as part of Ferguson's brigade, attacking the French who were holding the village of Blenheim itself. It was as they tried to battle into the village that Blackadder received a near-fatal wound to the throat. In his diary, he characteristically interpreted his survival as divine providence rather than mere luck. "Among the rest, I have also got a small touch of a wound in the throat. But this, so far from making me doubt of the care of the Providence, is really to me a great confirmation and a remarkable instance of his protection, for the wound is so gently and mercifully directed that there is no danger, whereas if it had been half an inch either to one side or the other, it might have proved mortal or dangerous." He was promoted to Major the following year, and in 1706 he found himself at Marlborough's next great battle, at Ramillies. Here, however, the Cameronians were merely told to hold a position on the left, whilst the cavalry, followed by other infantry regiments, stormed the centre. Despite this holding action, the regiment did sustain considerable casualties as they came under furious French artillery fire. They lost even more men the following year, although this time to disease, before once more going into action in August 1708 at the Siege of Lille. It took Marlborough 120 days and 15,000 casualties before the mighty citadel finally fell in the December, and one of those casualties was Blackadder. During an assault, he shouted to his men, "Grenadiers! In the name of God, attack!" before being wounded in the arm and then the head by musket balls. You might be starting to get the idea that whilst they share the same surname, he certainly wasn't like Rowan Atkinson's Edmund Blackadder. 1709, and yet another battle for John Blackadder. The Battle of Malplaquet was the bloodiest battle of Marlborough's career. The Allied army of around 86,000 attacked a well-entrenched French force of about 75,000. And whilst Marlborough won the field, it came at a terrible price. Around 21,000 Allied casualties, compared to 12,000 French. It was a Pyrrhic victory that shocked Britain and Europe. During the battle, the commander of the Cameronians, Colonel Cranston, was wounded by a cannonball. Blackadder was immediately given a battlefield promotion by Marlborough to the rank of lieutenant colonel and took command of the regiment for the rest of the battle. He remained lieutenant colonel of the regiment for the next 2 years, participating in 2 more sieges, before selling his commission and leaving the army in October 1711. He was 47 years old. Blackadder returned to Scotland, living first in Edinburgh and then in Stirling with his wife Anne, whom he had married back in 1702. But 4 years after his retirement, Blackadder was drawn back into service. In 1715, another Jacobite rebellion broke out. When a volunteer regiment was raised in Glasgow to oppose them, Blackadder's experience made him an obvious choice to be appointed their colonel. During the Battle of Sheriff Muir that November, Blackadder and his Glasgow Volunteer Regiment held the bridge nearby at Stirling, but were never called into action. They were disbanded shortly afterwards, following the Jacobite defeat at Preston, although the hero of our story remained with the government army until Perth was recaptured in early February 1716. For his services during the rebellion, he was appointed Deputy Governor of Stirling Castle and was made a Justice of the Peace. During his later years, he kept up an active religious life, becoming an elder at the College Church of Edinburgh and a member of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland. John Blackadder died on the 31st of August 1729, aged 64. He was buried in the West Church of Stirling, now the Church of the Holy Rood. With no children, he disappeared into the mists of history. Or at least, he did so for nearly a century. And then in 1824, his diaries recording his military service were published. The life and diary of Lieutenant Colonel J. Blackadder is now regarded as one of the most animated and useful accounts of military life in the early 18th century. A deeply religious man who killed a fellow officer, an incident that haunted him for the rest of his life, who was wounded 3 times in action, and who fought at some of the bloodiest battles in British military history, and was promoted in the field to command his regiment. Hardly like Rowan Atkinson's cunning, sarcastic comedy character. And whilst Edmund Blackadder never meets the Duke of Marlborough or fights at the Battle of Blenheim, he might have been shocked to meet the Blackadder who did. Sometimes history is far more fascinating than the made-up stuff. I'm going to explore Marlborough's bloody victory at the Battle of Malplaquet and how it brought about his downfall very soon, so please subscribe so you don't miss it. This episode was made possible thanks to the kind support of my many patrons and members, including Valerie Kemp, Edwin Punn and Neil Campbell. Details of how you can become a supporter or make a one-off donation are in the description below. Thanks for joining me today. Keep well, and I look forward to sharing more stories from British history with you very soon.